There was a funny story of a truck driver who worked for a cement company who had an extremely low temper. And the number one thing that really ticked off this guy was when somebody would block his driveway, even by a few inches. He had no patience. He right away started calling the cops, and the entire neighborhood knew not to mess with this guy. One day he comes home from an extremely long, tiring, exhausting day at work, and he sees how there's a car parked in his driveway. Forget blocking his driveway. Somebody parked in his driveway. He was in such fury. His blood was boiling. He had steam coming out of his nose. And he decided he's going to teach this guy who blocked his driveway a lesson that he'll never forget. He takes out a bat and he starts smashing all the windows. He starts smashing the headlights. He takes out a pocket knife. He starts slashing the tires. And just to teach this guy a real lesson, he gets back into his truck and he starts backing up into this guy's car a few times. And just to top it all off, he releases the cement from the truck onto the car. So this guy will never forget his lesson. He'll never even come to dream about blocking his driveway, forget about even parking in his driveway. And he feels all good about himself. He really taught this guy a lesson. He walks into his house, the lights are off, and he switches on the light, and suddenly he starts hearing surprise. He looks around and he sees from every corner of the room his family standing there screaming happy birthday, and they're singing happy birthday. And from the center walks up his son, and he presents to him keys to a brand new car. And he says, here you go, Dad. Here are the keys to the car that you've been always dreaming of, a brand new Rolls-Royce waiting right outside for you in the driveway. And he's like, you mean the car outside, the car I just smashed and slashed and bashed, the car I just destroyed in my driveway, that car was mine? When we're in a time of fury, when we are enraged, when we are angry, we start making the most irrational decisions. We start doing things that only end up hurting ourselves. We learn in this week's Parashat Vayera, we learn about many of the Makot, and from each one of the Makot, every single one of the plagues, we can learn a different lesson. But we can learn a very fundamental lesson from the Makkah of Tzifardea, the plague of frogs. The Pasuk tells us, Vata'al et Tzifardea, a frog emerged from the Nile. Now we know that there were many frogs that infested the land of Egypt. Why does the verse tell us only one frog came out of the Nile? And the rabbis teach us that it all started off with just one frog. We'll call this frog Frogzilla. This huge, gigantic, ginormous frog just pops out of the Nile, and all the Egyptians gathered together to try to figure out how they're going to get rid of this frog. So they started hitting it, and every time they would hit it, it would start multiplying. So they hit it again, and it quadrupled. And before they knew it, the entire land was filled with these frogs. Comes the stipler and he asks, if you see that hitting it doesn't work, and it doesn't make sense, why would you continue to hit it? I mean, for a somewhat sophisticated nation, Egypt was known to be the most sophisticated, the smartest nation in the world. They were advanced in every which way, in archaeology, in sorcery, in building pyramids, which is not simple. How could a somewhat smart people come along to make such a foolish mistake? If you see that your strategy is not working, why would you continue to hit the frogs? Find a different strategy, find a different method, find a different approach. Says the stipler that we can learn a very important midah from the Egyptians, a midah that we should all stay away from. And that midah is the midah of kas, anger. When we are in a moment of rage, we do things that only hurt ourselves. The Egyptians thought that the more they're going to hit the frog, the more they're going to get rid of it. And they thought that the only reason they're not getting rid of it is because maybe they're not hitting it hard enough. So they start hitting it harder. And so too, we're no different. We think that if we get angry, we're going to teach that person a lesson. If we get angry, we're going to take control of the situation, when in truth, the situation is taking control of us. So we have to take a lesson from the Egyptians to stay away from our greatest enemy, and that enemy is anger. The Gemara teaches us that anger is tantamount and comparable to idol worship. But idol worship doesn't make sense. It's illogical, it's irrational to worship sticks and stones and call it your God. And says the Gemara, that's exactly why we are comparing the two. Because just like idol worship doesn't make sense, anger can bring a person to doing things that don't make sense, things that are irrational. We learned that there are three things that the Gemara warns us to stay away from, because these three things can take a person out of this world. And those three things are anger, lust, and ego. When a person is in a moment of pride, when a person is in a moment of desire, when a person is in a moment of fury, all logic is out the window. And such a person cannot be spoken to logically. And if they don't take control over these midot, these character traits will take over them, just like they took over the Egyptians. So may we take a lesson. May we take a lesson from the Egyptians. The midah of anger. How it's our greatest enemy, how far we should stay away from it. Because in the end, we're going to regret the decisions that we are going to make as a result of our anger, as a result of our rage. I yet heard another interpretation behind why they kept hitting those frogs. And that is one word: ego. Each Egyptian said that you don't know how to hit the frog properly. Let me teach you a lesson. Let me show you how to hit the frog. And he came along with his stick and he started hitting the frog from this angle. And the other one said, no, you have to hit it from that angle. And their ego destroyed them. And so may we be aware of this midot. May we stay far as possible from these midot. Take a lesson in anger. Take a lesson in anger from the truck driver. Take a lesson in anger from the Egyptians. And may we apply this lesson and carry it on throughout the rest of our lives.